Sisters and brothers, grace and peace are yours this day from God our Creator. Amen. One of the greatest theologians of the 20th century was a Swiss man by the name of Karl Barth. His most famous written work is called Church Dogmatics, and it has over 9,000 pages, totaling more than 6 million words. The 14-volume set takes up about 2 feet of shelf space. Now, for all that he wrote in that great work and in others, today I'm going to borrow just one little phrase from him. Ecclesia semper reformanda est. Now, instead of making you dust off your Latin dictionary or pull out a translation app on your phone, I will help you out today. Ecclesia semper reformanda est means the church must always be reformed. The church must always be reformed. Lutheran Christians are very familiar with the idea of the church being reformed. We might even feel a little swell of pride in our namesake, Martin Luther, especially when we sing "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," also known as the Lutheran National Anthem. It's easy to look back and appreciate all those years of work and sacrifice and intellectual and theological progress that occurred during the Reformation. Martin Luther is, of course, a towering historical figure, but what he shepherded was not the Reformation, but a reformation of the church. Remember our Latin lesson from a moment ago, Ecclesia semper reformanda est. The church must always be reformed. So if the Reformation of the 16th century was just a reformation, not the Reformation, at what other times has the church experienced a reformation? Well, it's happened so many times over the centuries, all over the world, but I'll highlight just a few reformations of the church that I think are important to us. When European immigrants, mostly those from Germanic states, came to this area in the 1800s and planted new churches, the church was reformed. When the baby boomer generation came of age in the late 50s and 60s, we saw tons of growth in the building of churches, and at that time, we could say the church was reformed. And now, in what we call the postmodern era, in the middle of a pandemic even, the church is reforming. I wish I could tell you what it's going to look like on the other side, but it's hard to say exactly how the church is reforming at this moment. And I'm saying church with a capital C. The church universal is reforming, not just this congregation. And we don't know for sure what the church will look like in the future. I regularly hear memories of what it looked like in the past, though. Often with a tinge of nostalgia, actually, people will recount simpler times. They can remember when businesses were closed on Sundays and you knew where to find just about everyone on Sunday mornings. For people with those memories who have grown up in the church, the changes that we see today are so stark. It might feel today as if, well, in terms of the church, it might feel as if the earth is shaking underneath our feet, as if once solid ground is now like water that's raging and foaming. Now, do those words sound familiar? Those words belong to Psalm 46, which we read earlier. And that psalm proclaims that God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. Though the earth be moved and the mountains shake in the depths of the sea, though the waters rage and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult, we will not fear. We don't know who exactly wrote that psalm or what they were living through at the time, but we do know that it's about more than just violent weather events. Perhaps they were in the middle of a war. Perhaps there was sickness going through the land. Who knows? Scholars surmise that this psalm was written for the congregation to sing as they entered the assembly. And wow, I mean, what an opening hymn, right? Together in one voice, the people declare that no matter what happens around them, no matter what trials they face, no matter what change comes their way, God is present. God is steady. God is unchanging. Around the year 1527, Martin Luther paraphrased Psalm 46 and set it to music. It became what we know as a mighty fortress is our God. And it is how we opened our worship service today. Together, in one voice, across the radio, via YouTube, in one voice, we declared that no matter what happens around us, no matter what trials we face, no matter what change comes our way, God is present. God is steady. God is unchanging. This reformation that we are experiencing today is obviously very different than the reformations of the past. It's different than the Reformation brought about by immigrants starting new churches here, or the Reformation of the baby boomer generation. And while each Reformation has had certain shepherds, like Martin Luther, who guided the change, the power, that moving force behind each reformation has always been God. Even the world-changing, culture-changing Reformation of the 16th century, it wasn't about Luther. It was about God's renewing, reforming work in the world. I would invite you to look at that picture on the front cover of your bulletin. Even as Martin Luther preached, he wanted to ensure that people knew it wasn't about him. Whatever he said, whatever he did, he would always, always point to the cross. Because it's God's power to renew and reform that was made real in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is God's power to renew and reform that was at work through the church throughout the centuries all over the world. And it is God's power to renew and reform that is made real in our lives today. At the beginning of this worship service, we confessed that we are captive to sin and cannot free ourselves. We rely on the power of God to proclaim our release through the forgiveness of sins. Just read through that liturgy of the confession and forgiveness again. It is only through the power of God that we prisoners are made free. I pray that each and every one of us would take hold of that life-changing relationship that God offers and realize that we are not captive to sin, but it is not about us. It is about God's work on the cross. And because of God's work on the cross in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we are not imprisoned on a single path in life. We are free to be reformed by God over and over again, as many times as it takes. And if we should ever forget, I ask you to go buy some Play-Doh and remember that God holds us in his hands as a potter works with clay over and over again. But God, as the potter, never comes to the end, never finishes with us and puts us on a shelf and says we're done. God will always hold us and reshape us and reform us. Just like the church has never been limited to a single shape, church too is free to be reformed by God over and over again, as many times as it takes. Whatever change comes our way, whatever happens around us, the church may change, we may change, but God is steady and God is unchanging. We can be so thankful for the ways in which our ancestors in the faith have shepherded the church through reformations over the centuries. But we can never become complacent with the feeling that we're somehow done, that we've reached some state of perfection and just call it good. The work of reformation is ongoing for the church and for us as individuals. The work of reformation, ongoing. The church is like clay in the potter's hands. We are like clay in the potter's hands, always being shaped, molded, formed, and when mistakes occur, as they will, because we are subject to sin, God will work with us again, shape us into something new, and give us a fresh start. We are never a finished product that, once completed, can be put on a shelf and admired. So I ask you, dear people of God, how is God calling the church to be reformed in this time and place? How is God calling Zion Lutheran Church to be reformed in the community of Fredericksburg? How is God calling you to be reformed? There's no one right answer, but there is a wrong answer. The wrong answer is to say that it can't be done. Brothers and sisters, being reformed is in our DNA. And while we may weary sometimes of the heavy responsibility of shepherding the church through this current reformation, we look to those who have gone before us and we join their voices and sing, God is our refuge and strength. God is present in times of trouble, even when the earth shakes, even when the waters rage and foam, even when the mountains shake in the depths of the sea. We will not fear. Amen.